The wolves came at dawn. Severin heard them before she saw them, the sound of iron-shod hooves tearing through frost-hardened earth. The crack of branches snapping under warhorses bred for siege, not for forest trails. Then the voices, low and clipped, the kind that belonged to men trained to kill quietly and without hesitation. She was on her knees in the garden, fingers deep in cold soil, when the tree line erupted with movement. A column of riders poured through the gap between the ancient oaks, flooding through the breach in the trees. Armor glinted dull silver in the weak morning light. Banners she had not seen in years snapped in the wind, bearing a crest she had spent every one of those years trying to forget. The stag and the crescent moon. The sigil of the Valdrin throne. Severin's hands went still in the dirt. Her breath turned to glass in her lungs. There were dozens of them. 50, maybe more. The full royal guard in riding formation, lances upright, visors raised, their wolves pacing alongside the horses in that eerie, synchronized trot that only bonded war wolves could manage. And at their center, mounted on a war horse so black it seemed to swallow the morning light, sat the man she had run from, Cale Valdrin, Alpha King of the Northern Realm. He looked exactly the same and nothing like she remembered. The same dark hair cropped close at the sides, longer on top where the wind caught it. The same sharp jaw, the same broad shoulders that made every space he occupied feel too small. But something new had been carved into the lines of his expression. Something hollow and hard that had not been there when she had stood beside him as his Luna, his bonded mate, the other half of his throne. Before he had chosen another. Severin rose slowly. Soil clung to her knees, her hands, the hem of her worn linen dress. She looked nothing like a Luna. She looked like exactly what she was. A woman who had been living alone in the deep forest, growing herbs and mending her own clothing and pretending that the ache where the bond used to live was just the cold. Cale's gaze found her across the clearing, and the impact of it was physical. A blow to the sternum that stole her breath and sent her wolf surging forward beneath her skin for the first time in years. The animal howled inside her, desperate and furious, and Severin clenched her jaw and forced it down. He dismounted. The creak of leather, the heavy thud of boots hitting packed earth. The guards parted around him. He walked toward her, and every step shrank the distance she had spent years building. He stopped 10 paces away, close enough that she could see the silver threading through his temples. Close enough that she could smell him, pine and iron and something wounded, and her treacherous body responded with a flood of warmth she despised. Then the Alpha King of the Northern Realm did something that made every guard go rigid with shock. He dropped to one knee in the frost-covered grass, his head bowed, his fists pressed against the frozen ground. "I need your help," Cale said. His voice was rough, scraped raw. "And I have no right to ask." Severin stared down at the most powerful man in the realm kneeling in her garden, and she felt nothing. Or she told herself she felt nothing. The truth was far more complicated and far more dangerous. "Get up," she said quietly. He did not move. "Whatever you came here for," Severin continued, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her. "The answer is no." And that should have been the end of it. Severin had not intended to become invisible. It had happened gradually, the way a river changes course, one eroded inch at a time, until the woman who had once worn silk and spoken policy simply ceased to exist. The cottage had belonged to her grandmother, from the years before Severin's bloodline had been recognized, and she had been brought to court as a girl of 12. A small stone structure with a thatched roof that leaked in heavy rain and a fireplace that smoked when the wind blew from the east. It sat in a clearing deep enough in the thornwood that no patrol ever came this far. The nearest village was a 2-hour walk, and Severin went there only when she needed salt or lamp oil or news she did not want, but could not avoid. The news was always about him. The Alpha King had restructured the border garrisons. The Alpha King had negotiated a trade agreement with the southern pacts. The Alpha King's new Luna, The woman he had chosen over Severin had borne him no children and no heir. That last piece of information had arrived 6 months ago from the village baker's wife, delivered with the kind of pitying look that made Severin want to break something. She had bought her salt, walked home in silence, and spent the evening splitting firewood with more force than the task required. She did not care. She had trained herself not to care with the same methodical discipline she applied to everything else. The bond between them had been severed, or so she told herself. The mating bite on her neck had faded to a pale scar she covered with her collar and tried never to touch. On good days, she almost forgot it was there. On bad days, it burned. Today was a bad day. She had woken before dawn with the scar throbbing, a deep, insistent pulse that radiated heat down her shoulder and across her collarbone. The animal inside her, usually dormant, was agitated, pacing beneath her skin, sensing a storm. Something was coming. She had felt it the way animals feel earthquakes, in the bones, in the blood, in the wrongness of the air itself. And then the wolves came. Now she stood with soil on her hands and the Alpha King on his knees before her. He had risen at her command, towering over her the way he always had. She had forgotten how tall he was, how the sheer physical mass of him made the air feel thinner, the space feel tighter. Her wolf pressed forward again, whining, and Severin shoved it back with vicious internal force. "Dismiss your guard," she said. "Whatever you came to say it without an audience." Cale turned his head slightly and gave a single sharp nod. The captain of the guard, a scarred woman Severin did not recognize, raised a fist. The column withdrew to the tree line in near silence, taking the horses and the werewolves with them. Within a minute, the clearing was empty except for the two of them and the ghosts of everything they had been. "Talk," Severin commanded. Cale's jaw tightened. She could see him wrestling with words, selecting and discarding them. A man unused to asking for anything struggling to form a request. "The realm is dying," he said finally. "The crops are failing. Not from drought or blight. The soil itself is turning. Livestock sicken without cause. The wolves in the wild packs are going mad, attacking their own, and border settlements have been abandoned because the land beneath them turned to ash overnight." Severin searched his expression for deception and found none, only exhaustion so deep it had carved permanent hollows beneath his cheekbones. "What does this have to do with me?" "The elders believe it is a corruption of the land bond, the connection between the throne and the realm itself. It has been weakening since—" He stopped. His throat worked. "Since you left." "I did not leave," Severin said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You cast me aside. You chose Fenara over your bonded mate and announced it before the entire court. I walked out before you could have me formally removed. Do not rewrite history to my face." The muscle in his jaw jumped. "You are right. I did that. And Fenara is gone now. She left 8 months ago." "I know," Severin said flatly. "Then you know I have been alone. And the realm has been deteriorating, and the elders say the land bond cannot hold without a true Luna." He paused. "Without you." The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. "You want me to come back to save your kingdom, the kingdom you threw me out of?" "Yes," she laughed. It was a short, brittle sound. "No." She turned her back on him, an act of defiance that would have earned gasps at court, and walked toward her cottage door. "Take your army and your dying kingdom and leave my forest." "People are dying," Cale said to her back. "Children, families, entire villages being swallowed by something I cannot fight with soldiers or strategy. I have tried everything." Her hand paused on the door latch. She did not turn around. "I was not enough for you," she said quietly. "Find someone who is." She stepped inside and closed the door. Through the window, she watched him stand alone in her garden for a long time before walking back toward the tree line. But the beast inside her was howling, clawing at her insides with a ferocity that bordered on pain, and the scar on her neck was burning hotter than it had in years. That night, She dreamed of black earth splitting open beneath her feet, and the sound of wolves howling in agony, and woke gasping with the taste of ash on her tongue. He would be back. She knew it the way she knew her own heartbeat. And the terrifying thing was that some traitorous part of her was already waiting. He came back the next morning, and the morning after that. Each time, fewer guards. The first return brought 20 riders. The second brought 10. By the fourth morning, Cale arrived alone, on foot, carrying something wrapped in cloth. Severin watched him from the window, her arms crossed, her jaw set. She had not slept properly in days. The dreams were getting worse. Black earth, dead trees, rivers running thick with something that was not quite water. And always the howling, hundreds of wolves, crying out in a pitch that made her teeth ache. She opened the door before he could knock. "You are persistent," she said. "You are stubborn," he replied. "I learned it from watching you." Something passed across his expression, too quick to name. He held out the cloth-wrapped bundle. "It is not a gift. It is evidence." He unwrapped a glass jar filled with soil. But the soil was wrong. Not the rich, dark loam of healthy earth, but a dead, absolute black that seemed to absorb light. Threaded through it, like veins in diseased flesh, were thin lines of dull silver that pulsed with a faint, sickly luminescence. The animal inside Severin recoiled with a whimper of pure revulsion. "This is from the eastern settlement of Brannock," Cale said quietly. 200 people woke one morning to find this spreading beneath their homes. Within 3 days, every plant was dead. Within a week, the livestock began seizing. The villagers fled before it reached them. Severin could not look away from the jar. The silver veins pulsed slowly, rhythmically. Something alive in the heart of something dead. "May I come inside?" Cale asked. She should have said no. Every rational part of her brain screamed the word. But she stepped aside and let him pass, and the moment he crossed the threshold, her cottage, her sanctuary, her years of carefully constructed solitude, felt irreversibly changed. He was too large for the space. His shoulders nearly brushed the doorframe. His presence filled the small room the way smoke fills a jar, expanding into every corner, impossible to ignore. Severin moved to the opposite side of the table, putting solid oak between them, and gestured for him to sit. He sat. The chair creaked dangerously beneath his weight. "Talk," Severin commanded, the same word she had given him in the garden. It felt safer to keep things transactional. Cale set the jar on the table between them. The pulsing silver light cast strange shadows across him. "The elders call it the hollowing," he began. "It started as a patch of dead grass in the palace gardens 18 months ago. We thought it was a fungal infection, treated it, moved on. But it spread. Slowly at first, then faster. By last winter, farms on the palace grounds had gone barren. By spring, it had reached the outer villages. Fenara was your Luna. She held the bond for 2 years. Fenara was never my true mate. The bond never fully transferred. The elders warned me, but I did not listen. I thought strength of will could substitute for what was meant to be." "And what was meant to be?" Severin asked, her voice carefully neutral even as her pulse hammered. The scar on her neck answered for him, flaring with heat that traveled down to the center of her being. She stood abruptly and moved to the window. "You replaced me in front of the entire court. You stood on the dais with another woman's hand in yours and told the realm I was no longer your Luna. I felt the bond stretch and tear, and it was the worst pain I have ever known, worse than any wound, any illness, any grief. It felt like dying, except death would have been kinder because at least then it would have stopped." "I know," Cale murmured, too close behind her. "And nothing I say will undo it." "Then why are you here?" "Because the realm cannot pay for my sins, and because I made the worst mistake of my life, and I have been paying for it every day since." "If I agree to help," Severin said, turning to face him, "I am not coming back as your Luna. I am not coming back as your anything. I will examine the land bond, consult your elders, And return here when it is done. Those are my terms. Agreed. You will not touch me. Agreed. And you will tell me why you really chose Fanara. The true reason, not the political excuse you gave the court. The silence was heavy enough to crush. Cale did not answer immediately. He moved back to the table and sat, and the chair creaked beneath his weight. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she had ever heard it, stripped of authority, stripped of control. There was a prophecy, spoken by the seer Morin on the night of our bonding. She told me that my true mate would be the death of me, that the bond between us would destroy the throne, the realm, everything I had sworn to protect. Severin went still. The fire crackled. Outside, a winter bird called and received no answer. I chose Fanara because I was trying to save you, he continued, and his voice cracked on the last word. I thought if I severed the bond before it matured fully, I could prevent the prophecy from coming true. I thought I was being brave. I thought I was making a sacrifice. He paused. I was a coward. And instead, she whispered, you caused the very thing you were trying to prevent. His silence confirmed everything. You fool, she breathed. You absolute fool. When the sun began to set, Severin stood before him. I will come with you. Not for you. For the realm. She paused in the doorway. The seer's prophecy. Did it say anything else? Cale met her gaze. It said the death would come willingly, that the mate would choose it. The words hung in the darkening air. Severin felt the blood drain from her expression. He left her standing in the doorway with the last light dying around her and a prophecy coiling through her mind. The death would come willingly. The mate would choose it. That night, she did not sleep. She lay in the dark and listened to the wind and the distant, mournful howl of a wolf that sounded nothing like a wolf. And the scar on her neck burned and burned and burned. The journey to the palace took 2 days on horseback. Severin said nothing to Cale. She preferred the silence. But silence gave her too much room to think, and the closer they drew to the palace, the more the bond scar responded, progressing from a dull burn to a steady throb that reached toward him, straining to reconnect. On the second day, they crossed the boundary of the palace lands, and she saw the corruption for herself. A field of wheat that should have been chest-high stood stunted and gray, the stalks brittle, the heads empty. The soil was dead black, shot through with pulsing silver veins. A farmhouse at the field's edge stood abandoned, windows dark, door hanging open. Her wolf pressed forward, hackles raised, and for once, Severin did not push it back. The animal's instincts were screaming the same thing her own were. This was wrong. Not naturally wrong, not drought or disease, but fundamentally, structurally wrong, as though the very essence of the land had been poisoned at its source. How far does it extend? She asked, her first words in hours. At least 30 miles in every direction, spreading roughly a mile each week. And the palace? The gardens are dead. The inner courtyard cracked open 2 weeks ago. The foundation stones show the silver veining. He paused. The throne room floor split last month. The throne room, where the land bond is anchored. Yes. The implication settled over her with suffocating weight. If the corruption had reached the throne room, it had reached the bond anchor itself, the heart of the connection between the Valdrin line and the land they ruled. How long? She asked. 6 months. Maybe less. They reached the palace gates at dusk. The structure was as she remembered it, a fortress of dark stone and ancient timber that had stood for 400 years. But even at a distance she could see the damage, cracked spiderwebbing up the outer walls, sections of the rampart listing slightly, the stones beneath them undermined. The banners on the towers hung limp and faded, as though the wind itself had lost interest in them. The courtyard was worse. The cobblestones were split and heaved, silver veining visible in every crack, pulsing faintly in the failing light. The fountain at the center, which had run clear water for as long as anyone could remember, was dry. Its basin was choked with dead black soil. Servants gathered in the doorways to watch her arrive. Severin recognized some of their faces and saw the recognition spark in theirs, followed quickly by confusion and whispered conversations she could not hear and did not want to. "Your rooms have been prepared," Cale said as he dismounted. "The East Wing. Your old chambers." Severin stiffened. "I do not want my old chambers. They are the only rooms far enough from the throne room to be structurally sound. The West Wing is already compromised." She pressed her lips together and said nothing. He was not wrong, but the idea of sleeping in the room she had once shared with him, before everything fell apart, made something inside her constrict painfully. The palace steward, Adarin, appeared at the main doorway. Tall, lean, dark hair streaked with iron gray, her expression one of professional neutrality that did not quite mask the sharpness of her gaze. She had managed the household for 3 kings and had outlasted every political upheaval through sheer competence and an unwillingness to take sides. "Welcome back," Adarin said. "I will show you to your rooms. The council convenes at the 9th bell tomorrow. Elder Marin has requested a private audience with you before then." Severin's stomach dropped. Marin. The seer whose prophecy had destroyed her life. "I have nothing to say to Elder Marin." Adarin glanced back, one eyebrow raised. "She seems to have a great deal to say to you." The rooms were exactly as she had left them. Someone had kept them clean, the floors swept, the linens fresh, the fireplace laid with dry kindling. But the air held a stillness that spoke of long emptiness, rooms maintained but not lived in, preserved as though waiting for someone who was never supposed to return. Severin stood in the center of the chamber and pressed her palms against her eyes. The animal inside her was frantic now, pacing and whining, overwhelmed by the flood of scents and memories this place carried. Years of careful distance, of deliberate forgetting, unraveling in the time it took to walk through a door. A knock came at the outer chamber. It was not Cale. A young woman she did not recognize, slight and dark-eyed, carrying a tray of food and a folded note. "From the king, my lady," the girl said with a small bow. Severin waited until the girl left before unfolding the paper. 2 lines in Cale's sharp, angular hand. "Elder Marin did not tell me the full prophecy. There is more, and she will only speak it to you." Severin read it twice. Then she set it on the fire and watched it burn. She had come here to repair a land bond, to fix what Cale's cowardice had broken, and then to go home to her cottage and her solitude. But the prophecy was not finished. The seer had more to say. And Severin could feel, with a bone-deep certainty, that whatever Marin had been holding back was going to change everything. She did not eat. She did not sleep. She sat in the dark by the dying fire and listened to the palace groan around her, its ancient stones shifting and cracking as the corruption crept closer, and she waited for the 9th bell with the patience and the dread of a woman waiting for a verdict she already knew would be guilty. And somewhere in the palace, the Alpha King lay awake listening to the same groaning stones. If Severin had pressed her hand to the scar on her neck, she would have felt his heartbeat through it, synchronized with her own. But she was not ready for that. Not yet. The 9th bell rang through the palace with the weight of a funeral toll. Severin had been awake for hours, standing at the window, watching dawn bleed red across a landscape she barely recognized. The palace gardens below were skeletal. Rose bushes that had once bloomed in cascades of crimson and ivory were now blackened stumps. Everywhere, threading through the dead soil, the silver veins pulsed with their slow, rhythmic glow. She dressed in the only clothes she had brought from the cottage. Plain linen, practical boots, her hair pulled back in a simple braid. She looked nothing like a politician or a queen. She looked exactly like the woman she had become, and she did not care. Let them see what their king had reduced his Luna to. The council chamber floor was cracked, a fissure running from doorway to center, the familiar silver glow pulsing in its depths. 7 elders, 3 advisors, Adarin with a ledger, and Cale at the head of the table. He looked worse than yesterday. The hollows beneath his eyes had deepened. His skin had taken on an ashen quality. His clothing hung loose on his frame, as though he had been losing weight steadily for months. The corruption was not just killing the land, it was killing him. Severin stopped in the doorway, and every head in the room turned toward her. The silence that followed was dense with unasked questions and barely concealed judgment. She ignored all of it and walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table from Cale. She sat, folded her hands on the scarred wood, and waited. An elder named Haddon cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming, Lady Severin." "I am not a lady," she corrected. "I was stripped of that title when I was stripped of my position. Severin will do." "The situation is more complex than that," another elder began. "No," Severin interrupted. "It is not. The land bond is sustained by the mating bond of the ruling pair. When Cale severed our bond and took Fenara, the land bond fractured. It has been rotting the realm from within. I am here to fix what he broke." Haddon leaned forward. "Can you fix it?" "I need to examine the bond anchor directly." "The throne room is not safe," Cale said. His first words since she had entered. "Then it is a good thing I am not asking your permission," Severin replied without looking at him. She felt, rather than saw, the flicker of something cross his expression. When she finally glanced toward him, she found not anger, but respect. It unsettled her more than anger would have. The throne room was catastrophic. The great doors stood ajar, wedged open by a crack in the stone floor that ran the full width of the entrance. Inside, the flagstones were heaved and split, entire sections tilted at sharp angles. The silver veining was everywhere, dense and bright, pulsing with an intensity that made her skin crawl. The walls wept with condensation that smelled of copper and decay. And the throne itself, the ancient seat carved from a single massive oak that the first Valdrin king had claimed 4 centuries ago, was fractured down the center. Severin approached it slowly, her boots crunching on broken stone. Every instinct inside her was screaming, hackles raised, every nerve alight. But she did not run. She pressed her hand flat against the cracked wood and closed her eyes. The bond anchor hit her with the force of a wall of sound. A roaring, discordant vibration that resonated in her teeth, her bones, the chambers of her heart. She gasped. Her knees buckled and she caught herself against the armrest. "Severin." Cale was beside her instantly, his hand hovering at her elbow, not touching. "What is it?" "The anchor is screaming," she whispered. "It is in agony. The bond is not just fractured, it is being torn apart, actively, continuously." She opened her eyes and looked at him. He was close, too close, and the scent of him flooded her senses. Her wolf surged forward with such force that Severin stumbled. Cale caught her. His hands closed around her arms and the contact sent a cascade of heat through the bond scar that blurred her vision. For one heartbeat she felt everything. His guilt, vast and suffocating. His loneliness, a mirror of her own. His terror that the realm would die on his watch. And buried deep, a longing so fierce it stole her breath. He let go as though he had been burned. "I am sorry. I should not have touched you." Severin stared at him, her heart hammering. Through the remnant of their bond she had felt him as clearly as she felt her own pulse, and what she had felt was a man who was drowning. "The anchor cannot be repaired from the outside," she said, her voice unsteady. "It needs the living bond between 2 mates. That is why you brought me back. You need me to rebond with you. The elders believe it is the only way. And you? I believe I have no right to ask you for anything. Let alone that." She walked out and found a balcony overlooking the dead gardens. She gripped the stone railing until her knuckles ached. Rebond with him. Let him mark her again. Open the wound she had spent years closing. The thought made her stomach turn, but the alternative was worse. The alternative was watching thousands of people lose everything because she was too proud or too hurt to do what needed to be done. A voice behind her cut through the spiral. "You look like you could use a drink." Thessaly, captain of the King's Guard. Scarred, blunt, new since Severin's departure. After you were gone and after Finara left, Thessaly said, he stopped sleeping, stopped eating properly, trained in the yard until his hands bled, then trained some more. He went through 4 captains in 8 months because he kept driving them away with his temper. Then the corruption started, and it got worse. There were days when the entire guard kept their distance because the wolf was too close to the surface. Days when he could barely hold his shift. Severin's jaw tightened. She did not want to feel sympathy for him. Sympathy was dangerous. Sympathy led to forgiveness. And forgiveness led to vulnerability. And she had been vulnerable to Kael Valdrin once before, and it had nearly destroyed her. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Thessaly's expression was frank. "Because you need to know what you are walking into. He is not the man you remember. He is worse. And also, somehow, better." Elder Marin found Severin in the kitchens that evening, eating alone by the bread ovens. The seer was ancient in the way only seers became ancient, as though seeing the future consumed the body that housed it. White hair, milky eyes, a cane, and the unhurried confidence of a woman who had known exactly where to look. "The prophecy I spoke on your bonding night was incomplete," Marin began without preamble. "I told the king his true mate would be the death of him. That was true, but it was not the whole truth." "Then what is the whole truth?" Severin asked, setting down her bread. "The mate would be the death of the old king, the man consumed by duty and control and the terror of losing what he loved. The prophecy was not about physical death. It was about transformation, the shedding of what he was so he could become what the realm needed." Severin's hands gripped the table edge. Rage built behind her ribs, hot and bright, and so powerful it made her teeth ache. "He destroyed our bond because he thought I would kill him. Because you gave him half a prophecy and let him ruin us with the other half missing. I gave him what I was given. The rest did not come until 6 months after you left. 2.5 years. The word came out strangled. You have known the truth for 2.5 years and said nothing. I told the king there was more. I told him it needed to be spoken to you directly." "And he did not come for me?" Severin asked, then caught herself. He had come, with his entire guard kneeling in her garden. But he had spoken of the hollowing, the dying land, the failing bond. He had not said, "The prophecy was wrong. I destroyed us for nothing," because he did not know the full truth either. Severin stood, her chair scraping against the stone floor. "There is more," she said. It was not a question. She could see it in the set of Marin's mouth, in the careful way the old woman held herself, as though bracing for impact. "Yes," Marin replied. "Sit down." Severin did not sit. "Tell me." Marin drew a slow breath. "Your bond with the king was not ordinary. The land recognized it the moment it was formed. You were not just his Luna. You were the realm's anchor, the living root of the land bond itself." The words settled over Severin, cold and relentless and smothering. "When the king severed your mating bond," Marin continued, "he did not simply break a connection between 2 people. He tore the anchor from the living earth. The hollowing is not a corruption. It is a wound. The land is bleeding because you were ripped from it." Severin's knees went weak. She sat, not because Marin told her to, but because her legs simply stopped working. "The land is dying because of me," she whispered. "The land is dying because you were taken from it," Marin corrected gently. "There is a difference. Can it be healed? The mating bond must be remade. But the land bond requires something more. It requires sacrifice." Marin paused, genuine sorrow in those milky eyes. "The willing death the prophecy spoke of. A death of self. You would need to surrender your wolf to the land, give the animal spirit back to the earth to heal the wound. You would live, but as a human. No shift, no heightened senses, no bond with the wild. The wolf that has been part of you since birth would be gone." The room went very still. Even the bread ovens seemed to hold their breath. Severin felt the creature inside her press against her ribs, warm and alive and terrified. It had been dormant for years, barely stirring in exile. But now it was fully awake, and it knew what was being asked. "No," she said. The word came out broken. "You cannot ask me that." "I am not asking," Marin said quietly. "The land is asking, and it will keep asking until you answer." Severin pushed back from the table and fled the kitchen. She made it to the corridor before the tears came, hot and furious, blurring the stone walls into gray smears. A sound of pure anguish tore from her, resonating through every nerve. She crashed into something solid. Hands caught her shoulders, steadied her. She looked up through tear-blurred eyes and found Cale staring down at her, stricken. "What happened?" he demanded. "What did Marin say?" She shoved at his chest, but he did not move. He was a wall. An immovable, infuriating wall that smelled of home, and she hated him for it. "Let go of me," she choked. "You are shaking," Cale whispered, his voice dropping to something raw and frightened. "Severin, please, tell me what she said." The bond scar flared between them, and through the contact of his hands on her shoulders, she felt his fear crash into her. Not fear for himself. Not fear for the realm. Fear for her. Pure, undiluted terror that something had hurt her and he could not fix it. "She told me how to save the realm," Severin whispered. "And you are not going to like it." She told him by the fire, with the door locked, and Adarin stationed outside to ensure they were not disturbed. Cale stood by the window while she spoke. He did not interrupt. He did not move. He listened with the absolute stillness of a man hearing his own death sentence. When she finished, the silence that followed was the heaviest thing in the room. "No," he replied. "Cale. No." He turned from the window, and what she saw was not the controlled mask of a king. It was the desperate, fractured expression of a man watching the last thing he loved being taken from him. "I will not let you sacrifice your wolf. I will find another way." There is no other way. Marin was wrong before. Her half-truth destroyed everything. Why should I trust her now? Because the land is dying. Because the corruption has 6 months before it spreads beyond the northern realm entirely. This is not about trust. It is about reality. He crossed the room and dropped into the chair across from her, elbows on his knees, head bowed. She could see the tension vibrating through his shoulders, the way his fingers laced together so tightly his knuckles had gone bloodless. "I broke the bond. I caused the hollowing. And now you are the one who has to pay for it? With your wolf? With the most fundamental part of who you are?" Severin watched him struggle and felt something inside her widen. Because this was not the man who had stood on the dais and announced his new Luna. This was someone stripped to the raw foundation of himself, and what lay beneath the crown and the authority and the composure was grief. "I have not decided yet," she said quietly. "I want to try a partial reconnection with the bond anchor first. Stabilize the corruption. Buy us time to explore other options." "Is that possible?" "I do not know. The elders may have insights. Marin may have seen alternatives she chose not to share, which seems to be a habit of hers." The bitterness in her voice was sharp. "But I will not surrender my wolf without exhausting every other path first." "Agreed," Cale said immediately. Then, softer, "I will help you. Whatever you need." Severin looked at him across the firelight, and for the first time since she had left this palace, she did not look away. They went to the throne room together at midnight. Adarin had cleared the corridors at Severin's request. No guards, no servants, no witnesses. Just the two of them and the broken anchor and the silver-veined darkness. Severin knelt beside the fractured throne, placed both hands flat on the cracked floor, and reached for the anchor with everything she had. The connection seized her consciousness and dragged her down. She was somewhere else. A twisted version of the thornwood, trees too tall, branches bent at impossible angles. The ground was soft and yielding, not soil but something organic, something alive. The air tasted of copper and ash. And the silver veins were everywhere, threading through the ground, climbing the trees, pulsing with a slow heartbeat. This was the land bond itself. the interior of the connection between the Valdrin line and the earth, and it was rotting from within. She walked forward, her bare feet sinking slightly with each step. She could feel the land around her, feel its pain, an agony so vast it was almost incomprehensible. Years of slow decay, the anchor screaming into the void for its other half, for her. The guilt struck hard. She had been in her cottage, growing herbs, pretending the world did not exist, while the land itself was dying for lack of her. "I am here now," she whispered. "I am here." The ground beneath her feet shuddered. From somewhere deep in the twisted forest, a voice answered. Not a human voice. Something older, speaking in vibrations felt in the marrow rather than heard with the ears. "Come," it said. She walked deeper. The trees pressed closer, their branches reaching. Then she saw it. A clearing, and in its center, a wound. A ragged, gaping tear in the earth itself, edges black and weeping, so deep she could not see the bottom. The silver veins radiated outward from it, cracking outward in every direction. This was where the bond had been ripped free. This was the injury her absence had carved into the world. Severin dropped to her knees at its edge and wept. She did not know how long she stayed there. Time moved differently in this place, but eventually, she became aware of warmth at her back, a familiar scent cutting through the copper and ash. She turned. Cale stood behind her, his eyes wide, pale with shock. "How are you here?" she breathed. "I touched you," he said. "When you collapsed in the throne room, I caught you. And then I was here." He looked at the wound, and she watched everything fall away. The mask, the composure, the armor of control. What remained was utter devastation. "I did this," he said, and his voice broke on the last word. The ancient voice spoke again, resonating through both of them simultaneously. "Heal it, or it will consume everything." Severin reached for his hand. He took it, his fingers closing around hers with a grip that was equal parts desperation and reverence. The bond scars on both their necks flared with heat, and the remnant of their broken bond surged to life between them, raw and ragged and blazing. Then Severin gasped and opened her eyes. She was back in the throne room, on her knees, Cale's arms around her. He was breathing hard, his body trembling. "I saw it," he whispered. "I saw everything." "The partial reconnection worked," she said, her voice shaking. "The corruption should slow, at least for now. But the anchor responded to both of us, not just me." The implication settled between them. The bond was not dead. It was damaged, frayed, barely alive, but it was there. And for the first time in years, it was reaching for both of them. He helped her to her feet. His hand lingered on hers for a moment too long, and neither of them pulled away. "We should rest," Cale told her. "Tomorrow we consult the elders about what you saw." Severin nodded. They walked back through the cracked corridors in silence, their footsteps echoing off stone that groaned a fraction less than it had that morning. At the door to her chambers, they stopped. "I chose wrong," he said. She turned. He stood in the corridor, the torchlight casting deep shadows across him, and he looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff trying to find the courage to jump. "I chose wrong," he repeated. "I chose fear over you, and I will regret it for every day I have left. If you fix the land and go back to your cottage and I never see you again, I need you to know that. You deserved better than what I gave you." The words settled into her bones, into the hollow places she had carried, and something shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet. But the possibility of it, distant and faint, the first pale suggestion of light before dawn. "Good night, Cale," she said softly. She closed the door, pressed her back against it, and in the dark of her chambers, alone, she pressed her hand to the scar on her neck for the first time in years. His heartbeat was there, faint but steady, synchronized with her own, and her wolf, exhausted and terrified and aching, curled around the warmth of it and finally, finally slept. The days that followed were a slow negotiation between two people learning to share the same space again. Severin consulted the elders. She studied the old texts in the palace archive, brittle scrolls that smelled of dust and centuries, searching for any precedent, any record of a land bond being healed without the sacrifice Marin had described. Kale gave her unrestricted access to everything: the archives, the elders, the throne room, the bond anchor itself. He gave her space. He did not push, but he was always nearby. Not hovering, not intruding, just present. She would emerge from hours in the archive with aching eyes and a stiff neck, and there would be a tray of food on the table outside the door, still warm. She would walk the cracked corridors late at night when sleep refused to come, and she would catch his scent lingering in the passageway, fresh, as though he had been pacing the same halls minutes before. She would enter the throne room to work on the anchor, and his jacket would be draped over the chair by the door, left there so his scent surrounded her while she reached into the bond space. He never mentioned these things. She never acknowledged them. But each small gesture wore away at her walls, grain by grain. On the fourth day, the elders confirmed what she had feared. There was no alternative. The old texts were unanimous. Every precedent across 4 centuries of recorded history pointed to the same conclusion. Severin received the news in the archive. She thanked the elder who delivered it, waited until the door closed, and then sat very still for a long time. The animal inside her pressed against her, warm and alive and frightened. And what broke Severin was not the fear she felt from it, but the acceptance. The quiet, resigned willingness to be given up if that was what was needed. "You would let me," Severin whispered to the creature inside her. "You would go willingly." The wolf pressed closer, a warmth against her ribs that felt like an embrace. Severin closed her eyes and let the tears fall. She found Kale in the training yard that evening, alone, shirtless despite the cold, driving his fists into a leather striking post with a rhythm that spoke of years of practice and months of barely contained rage. His knuckles were split and bleeding. Sweat ran down the planes of his back despite the chill. He stopped when he saw her. His chest heaved, his split knuckles stained the frozen ground beneath him. "The elders confirmed it," she said. "There is no other way." His expression went rigid. He turned away from her, bracing his hands against the striking post. "Then I will hold the realm together by force if I have to. I will not let you do this." "It is not your decision." He spun back. "You are asking me to stand by while you destroy a part of yourself to fix a mistake that I made. How can you expect me to accept that? I am not asking you to accept it. I am telling you it is happening." He crossed the distance between them and stopped just short of touching her, his bloodied hands clenched at his sides. "You have already given up years of your life because of me. Your home, your position, everything. I will not take your wolf too." Severin looked up at him, at the blood on his hands and the devastation written into every line of him, and the way he stood there trembling with the effort of not reaching for her, and she felt the last wall inside her give way. Not crumble, not crack. Collapse entirely, the way a dam gives when the water behind it has simply become too heavy and too patient to be held any longer. "You are not taking anything," she said, and her voice was the steadiest it had been since she arrived. "I am choosing. For the first time in years, I am choosing something instead of running from it." "I cannot lose you again," he whispered. She reached up and placed her hand against his bare chest. His heart slammed against her palm, fast and desperate and alive. "Then do not," she said. He kissed her. Or she kissed him. It was impossible to tell who moved first, only that one moment there was space between them and the next there was none. His mouth found hers with a hunger that was years in the making, and Severin kissed him back with every ounce of fury and grief and love she had locked away in a stone cottage in the middle of nowhere. His hands came up to cradle her face, and she did not care about the state of them. Both of them shaking so hard they could barely stand. When they broke apart, Gasping, foreheads pressed together, Severin could feel the bond scar blazing between them. Both marks burning in perfect unison, reaching for each other across the scar tissue of wasted years. "I need to tell you something," Severin said. "Before tomorrow. Before I do this." "Anything," Cale breathed. "I forgive you." The words landed with the force of something physical. His expression crumpled. "You should not," he managed. "Probably not," she agreed. "But I do. And I need you to forgive yourself. Because tomorrow I am going to give my wolf to the land, and I am going to need you to be strong enough to hold me afterward. And you cannot do that if you are still drowning in guilt." He pulled her against him and held her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she let him because she needed it just as badly. She could hear his heartbeat through his ribs, and her wolf pressed forward and nuzzled against the warmth of his presence one final time. They stayed that way for a long time, in the cold training yard under a sky full of stars, holding each other and not speaking, because there was nothing left to say that their bodies were not already saying. That night they lay together in her chambers, fully clothed, her back against his chest, his arms around her. This was not about desire. This was about presence, about being held by the person you had ached for across years of enforced absence. She stayed awake, her hand resting on his forearm, feeling the pulse at his wrist. She did not want to waste a single moment of this night, the last night she would spend with her wolf alive inside her. She lay in the dark and felt the animal curled warm beneath her ribs, and she whispered goodbye to it in the silence of her own mind. And the wolf, loyal and fierce and gentle, pressed its nose against her heart and accepted what was coming with a grace that Severin knew she did not deserve. Dawn arrived too quickly. They went to the throne room together. The elders were there. Aderin was there. Thessaly stood by the door in full armor, her hand on her sword, though there was nothing here a blade could fight. Marin sat in a chair by the wall, her milky eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the room. Severin knelt beside the fractured throne. The silver veins pulsed around her, brighter than before, as though the land sensed what was about to happen and was reaching toward her in anticipation. Cale knelt beside her. She had not asked him to. He simply did it, lowering himself onto the broken stone, taking her hand, and refusing to let her do this alone. "You do not have to watch," she told him. "I am not leaving," he replied. His voice was calm. His hand was steady. His eyes were wrecked. She reached inward, past her thoughts, past her fear, down to the place where her wolf lived. The animal was waiting. Warm. Ready. Unafraid in a way that made Severin's courage feel small by comparison. "Thank you," Severin whispered to her wolf. "For everything." The wolf pressed its forehead against the inside of her one final time. A farewell. Then Severin opened the door between herself and the land and let go. The release was not violent. It was gentle. The most gentle thing she had ever felt. Her wolf flowed out of her, the spirit pouring through her hand into the stone, into the bond anchor, into the wounded land beneath. She felt the wound begin to close, felt the silver veins dim and fade, felt the earth sigh with a relief so profound it brought tears streaming down her face. And then her wolf was gone. The absence was immediate and total. A silence inside her where there had always been a presence, a coldness where there had always been warmth. Severin gasped, and the sound that came out of her was not a cry, but something deeper. Something that came from the hollow place where her wolf had lived for her entire life. Cale caught her as she fell. He pulled her against his chest, wrapping his body around hers, and she heard him speaking, her name, over and over, his voice breaking on every syllable. She could no longer feel his heartbeat through the bond. She could no longer smell his scent with heightened senses, but she could feel his arms around her. She could feel his tears falling into her hair. She could feel the warmth of him, ordinary human warmth, and it was enough. Beneath them, the throne room floor began to heal. The cracks sealed. The silver veins faded and disappeared. The stone settled back into place with a sound that carried through the walls and outward. And beyond the palace, spreading in an invisible wave, the hollowing reversed. Black soil turned rich and dark. Dead roots stirred. Somewhere in the outer fields, a single green shoot broke through the earth and reached for the sun. The land was alive again. Severin wept in Cale's arms, and he held her, and he did not let go. The wolf did not come back. Severin had known it would not, but knowing and accepting were different animals, if she could still use that word. The first weeks were the hardest. She reached for her heightened senses 100 times a day and found nothing. She tried to feel the bond through her scar and felt only skin. She walked into the forest surrounding the palace and stood among the trees and felt the absence of the wild in her blood, a phantom limb that ached without ceasing. But Cale was there, every morning, every evening, every difficult hour in between. He did not try to replace what she had lost. He did not pretend it was not a loss. He simply stood beside her and let her grieve. And when the grief became too heavy, he carried it with her. The realm healed. The crops returned. The abandoned settlements filled again with families who had nowhere else to go, and now had somewhere worth returning to. The fountain in the palace courtyard ran clear for the first time in 2 years, and the day it happened, Adaryn was seen sitting on its edge with her shoes off and her feet in the water, smiling in a way that made the entire household stop and stare. The bond between Severin and Cale reformed slowly, not with a mating bite, not with a surge of supernatural connection, but in the human way, through conversation, through patience, through the small accumulation of trust rebuilt one honest moment at a time. He brought her breakfast. She corrected his grammar in official correspondence. He laughed at things she said that were not meant to be funny. She found herself reaching for his hand without thinking, and no longer pulled away when she realized what she had done. On a morning in early spring, Severin woke in their shared chambers to pale sunlight and birdsong. Cale was still asleep beside her, one arm draped across her waist. Through the open window she could see the palace gardens in full bloom, roses climbing the restored stone walls in cascades of crimson and ivory. She placed her hand over his heart. No wolf stirred inside her, no heightened senses sharpened the moment, but she could feel him breathing, could feel the steady, ordinary, miraculous rhythm of his pulse beneath her palm, and that was enough. That was more than enough. Severin closed her eyes and let the morning hold them both. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you very soon for the next story.